so that that nation can reveal the identity of the one true God to the world. There is to be one dynastic family ruling that one kingdom that's revealing the world to God, to the world who God is. One capital city, one temple. And that divine intention ran up against the sin of Solomon, who began to rebel. And as a consequence, the Lord said, for a time, I'm going to allow that unified kingdom you have ruled Solomon to split into two. I think it's the hardest part of the Hebrew Bible Old Testament to read, because now we have two kingdoms, two capital cities, two different kings. And you can already hear there's a destruction or a divine concession to allow that one kingdom, one king, one capital, the ones to sort of begin to disintegrate. And despite that contingency of allowing for a divided kingdom and two capitals and two kings, there was never an intention to compromise about the one nation revealing the one true God to the world and the one temple in Jerusalem. So when we read this story of the divided kingdom, we have to see that there's certain divinely tolerated contingency, two kings, two capitals, two countries, Israel and Judah. Israel, the name of the kingdom that continued in the north, Judah, the name of the kingdom that continued in the south. But there was never to be a divine contingency that said, okay, you are relieved of your responsibility as a nation to reveal God as one through one temple. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And that's when we run into the apostasy of this place, 1 Kings 12. It is, I think, the most heinous place in the Old Testament, if you will. It is part of the promised land. It is part of the people of God in the past who are to reveal the one true God to the world through their worship at the one temple in Jerusalem. And Jeroboam, the first king of the north, says, I need to change that. And so we're going to pick up his story that's related to this infrastructure here, a story that starts in 1 Kings 12. So far, so good, or have I pre-lunch lost you? No, I haven't pre-lunch lost you. So listen to what he does. Now again, after Solomon dies, 931 BC, his son Rehoboam was to continue leading the kingdom in the south, capital Jerusalem, temple Jerusalem. And for a time, God tolerated a northern kingdom, own capital, own king. Jeroboam is the first up here. So we're diving into his strategy. I'm at 1 Kings 12:26. King Jeroboam, so you know where we are, we're in the northern kingdom, thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. Only that it would, right? That's the plan, that's the divine plan. There's a contingency for separation, but he's worried that because you have people who still are remembering the united monarchy under David's family, they're going to want to go back. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their lord Rehoboam, Solomon's son, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. He sees his problem in political terms. Mm-hmm. If I encourage or allow people to go to Jerusalem to worship, they're going to begin to agitate for restoration of the United Kingdom under descendant of David. One of the, we're talking the 5 ones there, right? And eventually the contingency plan of the Lord will come full circle to that. But he sees it as a threat to his political well-being here in the north. So he says, after seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves, and he said to the people, it's too much for you to go to Jerusalem. That's an alarming phrase, because Jerusalem is the place where God says, I am one, I am with you, I forgive you. Now he's saying, let's cut that off. Let's not go there anymore. It's too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. Now he's conflating 2 things there. He's conflating the calf symbol with the deity that brought them out of Egypt. They're two different things. The calf deity was the deity associated with the worship of Baal. Been there, done that, know that. Jeroboam has a certain constituency in his kingdom that is going to be worshiping Baal. And so he says, if we're going to have a new national religion around which we gather people at Bethel and Dan, and that will bring them together under my leadership, I need to service them. The symbol of our deity here is going to be a calf. And then he uses a phrase that's related to the history of God's people of the past, that incredible moment of Exodus from Egypt, and says, here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. See how it's conflating Canaanite worship and worship of the Lord. One he set up in Bethel, the other at Dan. Let's think about the two locations. Bethel is on the north side of the Benjamin Plateau. So if you can picture in your mental map how you would go from up here down until you got to the Jezreel Valley, the ridge route you would take to Jerusalem intercepts Bethel before it gets to Jerusalem. And so that makes perfect sense if you're trying to intercept people who might be on their way to Jerusalem on the ridge route. They're going to go through Bethel, and he's saying stop here rather than go on to Jerusalem. The other one he sets up at Dan. And that seems a little weird because it's way out in the northern part of his kingdom, until you realize his strategy is rhetorical. The old language of the United Kingdom said that the kingdom of Israel stretched from between two cities. Do you remember what they were?
Dan to Beersheba.
From Dan to Beersheba. And now he's going, I don't like that formula because it suggests reunification. In order to realize the reality of that, Dan to Beersheba, we've got to reunite. And so instead, he would like people to think Dan to Bethel. And that's the new phrase. And by putting a sanctuary here, and by putting a sanctuary at Bethel, he's marking the north and south terminus of his kingdom and saying, this is us now, and these are our deities that we worship together. Canaanite, disaffected Israelite, we're all in the same boat. We're all members of this northern kingdom. Here are your gods, O Israel, calf deities, imagery, who brought you out. I hope you sense the difficulty of that when you have one God, one dynastic family, one nation, one dynastic family, one capital city, one temple. If that's the ideal, this is just moving way off the grid away from that. And this thing became a sin. We almost could expect that statement. And this thing became a sin. The people came to worship the one at Bethel and went as far as Dan to worship the other. Jeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they weren't Levites. Levites were to be the clergy tribe. Didn't matter. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festivals held in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. We'll talk about that in the archaeology. And this he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he had made. And Bethel also installed priests at the high places he had made. This is a lightning bolt moment in the story of salvation, because suddenly the tried and true clear message of one God, one people, one dynasty, one capital, one temple is almost all undercut by the actions of Jeroboam here. So you might expect a pushback, and you get it over and over and over again as you read the evaluation of the kings in the north. They're evaluated on what they do with this, and everyone leaves it in place. The prophets rail against it, and I'm going to read just a couple of verses from 2 Kings 17 to round that picture out. 2 Kings 17 to round that picture out. 2 Kings 17, verse 21 to 23. Eventually, what happens up here initiates a process where the Lord says, the northern kingdom no longer has the capacity to give a good witness to the world. Let that settle for a moment. The mission here is to help the pagan world understand the reality of one God. And when you simply confuse that by conflating one God with others, you no longer are accomplishing your mission. And the Lord let the northern kingdom go into exile. 722 BC, this place is destroyed by the Assyrians. 2 Kings 17:21. When he tore Israel away from the house of David, they made Jeroboam son of Nebat king. Jeroboam enticed Israel away from following the Lord and caused them to commit a great sin. Think grievous, think off the grid, awful sin. This is not a moral failing in the sense that I'm not living well anymore in relationship to my neighbor. This is a grave sin in the sense that you are no longer witnessing in the way you've been called to witness, that God is one. The Israelites persisted in all the sins of Jeroboam and did not turn away from them until the Lord removed them from his presence, as he warned through all his servants the prophets. So the people of Israel were taken away from their homeland into Assyria, and they are still there. The legacy of the northern kingdom and its rebellion that is initiated here has a trajectory that brings the people out of this land who were to be in this land giving a witness to the one true God. And those northern kingdom tribes, unlike the southern kingdom tribe of Judah, went into exile and did not return in mass. There were some individuals who came back, but there is not a corporate return like we read about in Ezra and Nehemiah for the southern kingdom. And the biblical authors and prophets anchor that in what you are looking at right here, the sin of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. You should feel the negatives of this place. This is a story of apostasy. So we have a divine intention, a divine contingency, allowing for separation of the kingdoms, but perpetuation of the mission. Keep coming to Jerusalem, keep giving witness to the one true God, anticipate reunification at some point. And then we have the mortal apostasy, the abandonment of that mission, and the consequences: you leave the land and you don't come back as a unit. That is a powerful word of judgment in this space. So, not the feel-good place, that we've had in other places, but I think it's a place that's important to come to and get, because you'll then understand when people mention Dan in the register of poetry or in the register of prophecy, the overtones, the undertones, the every tone is failure to be the people of God that you needed to be, and the consequences and peril of that. And it's all flows out of that basic idea: if you can't answer the question, well, who is God for the world, then you no longer get to be the witness to the world about who God is.